The night before my wedding, I learned the cruelest truth of all. Even blood can betray you. I trusted them, my own parents. Yet I woke up drugged, my head shaved, stripped of the one thing I had cherished for years. That's when I realized I was never their daughter. I was their scapegoat. My name is Dorcas Hensley, and this is how they tried to break me, only to end up trembling themselves. The day had been filled with laughter, hugs, and endless well wishes. Friends stopped by to drop off small gifts, and Caleb had slipped a note into my hand before leaving for the night. Just 3 words written in his quick, slanted handwriting. Tomorrow, forever begins. My heart carried those words like a secret flame as I drove back to my parents' house. Tradition demanded I sleep there the night before my wedding. And though part of me resisted, I told myself it would be fine. It was only one night. Inside the house, everything looked polished, ready for the guests who would flood in the next day. My father moved about with his usual stiff pride. My mother fluttered in and out of the kitchen, and Nora, always adored, always untouchable, made her grand entrance as if the weekend belonged solely to her. The way they spoke to me, sweet on the surface but edged with disdain, was nothing new. I had been raised in their shadow play of appearances. A father respected at church, a mother who wore pearls and smiled through gossip, and a sister praised as the family jewel. And me, the one who never seemed to shine brightly enough to satisfy them. That night, I slipped into the guest room that had once been mine. The walls still carried relics of my childhood, but I felt like a stranger in my own skin. When my mother appeared at the door with a delicate porcelain cup, steam rising from the herbal tea, I hesitated. She urged gently, insisting it would help me rest for the most important why of my life. I took a sip. The bitterness clung to my tongue, odd, but not alarming, until the heaviness crept through my limbs. My eyelids fluttered. Voices blurred into the dark. A low murmur from my father, chilling in its certainty. At least tomorrow she won't outshine her sister. Then Nora's voice, sharp and eager. Shave it all off, Mom. The sound of clippers roared against the silence of the night, and I slipped under, realizing too late that what awaited me was not a dream, but a nightmare. The morning light spilled across the room I once called mine, but nothing about it felt familiar. My head was heavy, my thoughts sluggish, and as my hand drifted up in confusion, my fingers slid over bare skin, smooth, exposed. My breath caught in my throat. I sat up too fast, the room spinning, and when my hand swept over my scalp again, the truth slammed into me. I was bald. A scream ripped from my chest before I could stop it. The door opened, and my mother stepped in, her face calm, almost rehearsed. "You are under so much stress," she said softly, as if explaining away a trivial accident. "We had to do what was best to spare you from embarrassment." My father lingered in the hallway, his eyes fixed on the floorboards, refusing to meet mine. Nora followed close behind, her hands pressed dramatically to her mouth. Her voice trembled with feigned horror, yet her eyes glittered, betraying the satisfaction she could never fully hide. The silence broke when my father muttered under his breath, low but clear enough to slice through me, "At least tomorrow she won't outshine her sister." The words knocked the air out of my lungs. My heart pounded as hot tears burned my eyes. This wasn't care. This wasn't love twisted by worry. It was collusion. It was betrayal dressed in piety and propriety. 2 years I had grown my hair for this day, each inch a thread of anticipation, and now it lay discarded somewhere, treated like nothing more than garbage. I pulled the blanket tight around my shoulders, shaking, every nerve on fire. Rage, shame, disbelief tangled together until I could hardly breathe. They had taken from me more than hair. They had stolen the dignity of my moment, shredded it before it ever began. I couldn't stay in that house another second. My legs carried me on instinct down the driveway, away from the suffocating walls, until I found myself knocking on a worn apartment door on the edge of town. It opened to reveal my mother's sister, Elaine, the family shadow, the one they rarely mentioned, the one they had branded difficult years ago. Her small living room smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She studied me in silence for a moment, her eyes narrowing at the sight of my bare scalp. Then she ushered me inside. There was no performance in her expression, no false sympathy, only recognition. She had lived this kind of cruelty before. "I heard them," she said flatly as I sat trembling on her sofa. My pulse quickened. Elaine reached for her phone, thumb tapping until a recording filled the room. Nora's voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the speaker. "If she walks down that aisle prettier than me, I'll never forgive you." "Mom, shave it all off." The sound hollowed me out. My stomach twisted, my throat closed, but Elaine didn't flinch. She held the phone steady, her voice calm but fierce. "You don't have to let them write the story for you. This time you have proof. Use it." In that moment, something shifted. For the first time since waking to the nightmare, a crack of light pierced through the darkness. I wasn't entirely alone. Someone not only believed me, but armed me with the truth. The betrayal still throbbed like an open wound. But now I had a weapon. The satin fabric of my dress whispered with each step as I fastened the veil over my head. In the mirror, I caught my own reflection. The silhouette of a bride, radiant on the surface, but beneath the thin veil, the lid of my bare scalp stared back like an open wound. My chest tightened, and I whispered to myself, steady and low, "Keep walking." Inside St. Mary's, the scent of lilies and polished wood filled the air, the organ swelling with solemn chords. I clung to Caleb's hand, and together we moved down the aisle. For a moment, the veil gave me shelter. Guests smiled, some whispering about my bold choice and style, as if it were intentional. A fashion statement. Then a breeze swept through the stained glass windows, lifting the fabric. My secret vanished in an instant. My scalp, stark and exposed, caught the light. A ripple of gasps rolled through the pews, phones lit up, lenses rising, capturing me in my most fragile moment. Caleb's grip tightened, his voice warm against my ear. "I love you, not your hair." Tears slipped down my cheek, not from shame, but from the fierce relief of knowing I wasn't alone in this storm. As the pastor began to speak, another tremor struck. A buzz of notifications spread among my old friends, seated together. Someone had already sent a clip of me unveiled, and it was flying through group chats like wildfire. By the time the vows began, my wedding wasn't just whispered about inside those walls. It was spilling out into the world beyond. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, but the glow did nothing to lift the heavy air. Every time I caught a guest's gaze, it darted quickly away, as though my presence carried a bruise they were embarrassed to look at. The clink of silverware was too sharp, the hum of conversation too hushed. At our table, the fault lines widened. My mother leaned back with a smirk that cut sharper than any blade. "She always needs to be the center of attention," she remarked, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. My father nodded solemnly, as if it were a truth long established. Nora lowered her head, shoulders trembling in a performance of grief, but I caught the faint twitch of a smile she couldn't suppress. The sting burned hotter than the champagne sliding down my throat. Before I could speak, Caleb's glass hit the table with a crack. His voice carried clear, firm, unflinching. "The only shame here isn't hers." A silence spread like wildfire. My in-laws stiffened, exchanging uneasy glances, but it was clear where their loyalties lay, firmly at my side. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from a pulse of determination. Across the room, Elaine caught my eye. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her small nod was enough, a reminder of what I carried hidden in the folds of my gown. My hand brushed against the USB tucked safely away, a quiet weight with explosive potential. I drew in a slow breath, a vow forming silently on my tongue. They had turned my wedding into a spectacle, but the ending of the story would belong to me. And when it came, they would tremble. Halfway through the reception, I motioned for my parents and Nora to join the table where Caleb's family sat. My heart pounded, not from hope, but from resolve. I wanted to give them one last chance to face me honestly, but deep down I knew this was my moment to strip away the mask they'd hidden behind for years. My mother leaned back at her chair, lips curling into a cold smile. "My daughter has delusions," she declared for everyone to hear. "She makes things up just to shame us," my father added gravely. "She's always looking for ways to humiliate her family." The words dropped like stones, each one intended to bury me. Nora dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her shoulders shaking in a performance worthy of applause. "I only ever wanted my sister to be happy," she whimpered, but the quick, sharp glance she shot me carried pure defiance. It wasn't grief. It was triumph. For a moment, the table fell silent, the weight of their cruelty pressing into the air. Then Caleb's mother broke it, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "If this is how you speak of your daughter on her wedding day, I understand completely why she would want to leave your house behind." The words struck like a hammer, shattering the facade. I felt the blood rush to my face, but it wasn't shame anymore. It was clarity. My hand brushed against the USB, hidden in the folds of my gown. My pulse thundered. Enough pretending. Enough silenced. I rose slowly, chair scraping back. My voice came out steady, even calm. "If you want the truth, then listen." The reception hall froze the moment I slid the USB into the laptop. The screen flickered. Then a voice burst through the speakers. Nora's voice, shrill and unmistakable. "If she walks down that aisle prettier than me, I'll never forgive you." "Mom, shave it all off." Gasps rippled across the room. Nora's face drained of color. "That's fake," she shouted, her voice cracking. "That's not me." I clicked again. A new image filled the screen. A pharmacy receipt, the ink fresh, my father's name printed clearly beside the words sedative medication. The date, 2 days before the wedding. Beads of sweat trickled down his temple as he sank lower in his chair. Then came another blow. My Uncle Robert, pale but resolute, stood from his seat. "I heard them planning this last week," he confessed, his voice trembling. "I didn't think they'd actually go through with it, but they did." Murmurs spread like fire, outrage crackling through every corner of the hall, and then the final strike. A grainy kitchen recording filled the screen. My mother, her hand steady as she tipped powder into a porcelain cup, stirred, and set it neatly on a silver tray. The footage was clear, damning, impossible to deny. Nora shrieked, clawing at the tablecloth. My mother crumpled into her hands, sobbing. My father bowed his head, defeated, unable to utter a single word. Around us, the crowd's eyes burned with fury and disgust. The Riverside Ballroom no longer felt like a wedding celebration. It was a courtroom, and I stood, not as the victim they'd painted me to be, but as the witness holding every piece of their guilt in my hands. The ballroom hung in a silence, so sharp it made my ears ring. The final frame of the video froze on the screen, my mother's hand hovering over the porcelain cup, caught forever in betrayal. 100 sets of eyes shifted from me to them, murmurs swelling into an undercurrent that rattled the air. Then the pastor slammed his palm against the table, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This is abuse, not love," he thundered, the words echoing off crystal and marble. He pointed directly at my parents and Nora. "You will leave this reception immediately." Nora erupted before the command could sink in. Her face contorted, the mask of innocence ripping apart. "She's always been jealous of me," she screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "Since we were kids, she's hated that I was the one everyone loved." The irony struck the crowd instantly. Her outburst revealed exactly what she had fought so hard to hide. My parents clutched each other's hands, trembling, whispering frantic pleas for the room to believe them, but no one moved toward them. No one defended them. For the first time in my life, their power over the narrative dissolved right in front of me. And then Caleb rose. His hand found mine, squeezing hard, grounding me. His voice rang out steady and proud. "This is my wife, and I will never let anyone humiliate her again." The tide turned. Guests stood. First a trickle, then a wave. Applause thundered through the hall, drowning out Nora's wails and my parents' desperate cries. Strangers embraced me. Friends pressed my shoulders with quiet strength. The crowd that once whispered now lifted me on a wave of solidarity. Under the brilliance of the chandeliers, I watched my family retreat, faces pale, backs hunched, shamed into silence. And for the first time, I stood not as their scapegoat, but as the woman who had stripped them bare before the world. Days after the wedding, the applause and chaos of the reception still echoed in my ears. But in our small apartment, the world felt quiet, almost tender. Caleb sat beside me as I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen lighting our faces in the dark. With trembling hands, I uploaded everything: Elaine's recording, the pharmacy receipt with my father's name, the kitchen video of my mother stirring powder into tea. I wrote the truth plainly. No embellishment, no bitterness, just what had been done and how. Then I pressed publish. Within hours, the post began to spread. By the next morning, the counter had jumped into the thousands. People I had never met left comments, sharing their own scars, stories of parents who broke them in the name of love, siblings who turned cruelty into rivalry. My inbox flooded with messages that all carried the same undertone. Thank you. I thought I was alone. Meanwhile, Portland buzzed with whispers that no longer stayed in shadows. My parents and Nora, once admired for their spotless image, found themselves shunned. The church they leaned on for status demanded their resignation. Friends they had dined with crossed the street to avoid them. The very stage they had fought to control turned against them. I sat at the desk, reading message after message, waiting for that surge of triumph I thought would come. But it didn't. What I felt was release, like setting down a weight I had carried since childhood. I realized I didn't need courtrooms or revenge. The trial had already happened, and the verdict was clear. What I hadn't expected was what came next. My words rippled outward, drawing others into the light. Survivors of hidden wars within their own families reached for me, and without planning to, I became a voice they trusted. My story was no longer just mine. It belonged to every soul who had been silenced at their own table. And in that truth, I found a power deeper than vengeance. The wind outside roared against the walls of the cabin, rattling the glass panes as if the sea itself was demanding to be heard. Waves slammed against the jagged Oregon coast, each one breaking with a force that mirrored the storm I had carried inside me for so long. Yet within these wooden walls, the air was still, softened by the low crackle of the fireplace and the steady presence of Caleb moving quietly behind me. Our honeymoon had none of the extravagance my parents would have flaunted. It was simple, secluded, and exactly what I needed, a place where no one's eyes followed me, no one's whispers clung to my skin. In the small bathroom mirror, I studied the uneven remnants of my hair, the cruel reminder of a night I would never forget. My hand closed around the scissors, their weight both foreign and empowering. I lifted a section, jagged at the end, and clipped. The strands fell silently into the sink. Another snip, then another. The rhythm steadied my breath, each cut peeling away the last hold they had on me. When I lowered the scissors, a new shape stared back, short, sharp, unapologetic. A pixie cut, not a scar, but a choice. For a moment, I just looked. The woman in the mirror wasn't the humiliated bride they had tried to carve out of me. She wasn't their scapegoat, their burden, their sacrifice. He was mine. Whole, unashamed, undeniably freed. My lips curved into a quiet smile as I whispered to the reflection. They trembled because they feared losing their reputation. But me, I am finally free. Arms slipped around my waist, warm and grounding. Caleb's chest pressed against my back, his kiss landing soft on my forehead. No words, just presence, steady as the tide. I held my own gaze in the glass, the firelight flickering across my face. The smile grew, not tentative but certain. What looked back at me was not an ending, not a ruined bride, but the beginning of a life I had chosen. And as the waves pounded ceaselessly outside, I knew this was my rebirth. Not theirs to name, not theirs to destroy, mine alone. The first chapter of a story I would write with my own hands.